listener to the Campfire Cult Podcast. From a camper van deep in the haunted woods, I bring you first-hand accounts of chilling encounters with the paranormal. Step into the night and take a peek into the realm where reality and the supernatural collide. My name is Jazz, and I'll be your host. Welcome back, campers. Tonight I've got a good one for you. We're headed deep into the haunted woods with stories of Bigfoot and Dogman, as well as a possible demon and our first Mothman encounter. Now, I think I've said this before, but I'm not a religious person at all. With that being said, I've always found demon and religious mythology-based encounters really unnerving. I think it stems from my first viewing of The Exorcist when I was about 7 or 8, sometime in the year 1985. That was, and still is, a movie I can't watch without closing my eyes or looking away several times throughout the movie. If you haven't seen it in a while, go check it out. It holds up. Anyway, let's get into this episode. For our first story of the evening, we're headed to a secluded cabin where a family has an experience with something outside, deep, deep in the woods.
Where I live, we have had relatively few COVID cases. There were almost none at all back in the fall of 2020. Because of that, although we were still living under certain restrictions, we had more public health-sanctioned freedoms than many other places. For example, at the time we were permitted to share our social bubble with one other household and travel within our region. My family and our fellow bubble family decided to take advantage of this by going on a fall getaway. We rented 2 side-by-side cabins in a beautiful, waterfront wooded area and had a lovely, relaxing weekend. Although there were other cabins nearby, most were not occupied, and we saw no other people. Though we did hear a dog barking a few times somewhere not far off. On our final night there, my son decided to sleep in the other cabin with his bubble siblings. Around 11 p.m. he called over, asking for some forgotten thing. It was a very dark night and there were certainly no streetlights in the deeply wooded cabin area, so I grabbed my flashlight and walked the short distance to the neighboring cabin to deliver whatever it was that he needed. On the walk back, I heard a whistle. It was a very human-sounding whistle, exactly the kind of whistle one makes to call in a dog. It sounded very close, but shining my light around, I saw nobody. I heard it again and assumed someone was whistling for the dog we'd heard earlier, so didn't think much of it. A short time later, another call came from next door. My son couldn't settle and wanted to come back to our cabin. This time, my wife and I both walked over, collected our child and his stuff, said goodnight to our bubble family, and walked back. We heard the same whistle again several times. It seemed to be on the dirt road ahead of us, moving gradually away. My wife commented that the dog must have gotten loose, and the owner was out looking for it. Inside our cabin, we continued to hear the whistling coming at irregular intervals of maybe 2 to 4 minutes. At first, it would be loud and seemed close. Then it would gradually grow fainter, then stop as though the whistler had moved out of earshot. Then it would seem to circle around, coming from the other direction, getting louder as it moved past our cabin, then fading again into the distance. Then it would start all over again. Still not thinking much of it, my wife climbed into the loft to go to sleep, while I started to pack for the trip home the next day. Our son was sleeping in a little room on the main floor to the left of the front door, and the small window in his room was cracked open to let in the unseasonably warm night air. I was standing by that window, quietly gathering his scattered things, while the whistle once again drew closer. But this time, instead of fading as it passed by, the next one was very close and incredibly loud, as though the whistler was just outside my son's window. The blind was down, but I was sure someone was on the porch right outside. I leapt to the front door, flung it open, and threw on the porch light, ready to tell off some prankster on our doorstep. Nobody was there. I grabbed my flashlight and took a few steps out past the circle of light, then thought better of it and retreated inside. I locked up the cabin, closed and latched all the windows, and lowered all the blinds. If someone was creeping around outside our cabin, I didn't want them looking in at us from the darkness, Deciding that I did not want to leave my sleeping son downstairs by himself, I settled on the sofa with a book. The whistles continued. Between each one, I would convince myself it was just a bird or an animal, only to hear it again and be certain that it could only be a human sound. The irregularity of it, and the slight variations in pitch and tone also told me that it wasn't something mechanical or electrical or automated. Around 1:30 a.m., my wife suddenly got up and started to get dressed. I asked her what she was doing. "I'm going out to find whoever that is and ask them why they've been whistling for hours," she said. I was horrified. I felt deep in my bones that it would not be safe to go outside that night. I insisted that she go back to bed, and thankfully she did. I sat vigil listening to the intermittent whistles for at least another hour, until finally I dozed off on the sofa. When I awoke, it was morning, the sun was peeking around the blinds, and the whistling had stopped. I cautiously peered outside, half expecting to see some sort of evidence of a nighttime intruder, but there was none. A little while later, we wandered next door, coffee mugs in hand, to get our friend's take on the mystery whistler. Amazingly, they had not heard a thing, despite the fact that the sound was so clearly audible in our cabin and would have passed right by them. We couldn't understand how they had not heard it. At checkout, I asked the woman at the kiosk down the road about it, but she just looked at me strangely and said she didn't know what it could have been. When I got home, I searched for audio of bird calls common to the area, and then ones not common to the area, in the hope of finding that same whistle. Nothing I found was even close, and we still don't know what we heard that night, circling our cabin for hours and stopping just outside our front door.
Next, we'll find out that even the most routine camping trips can take a very creepy turn.
In 2016, a girlfriend of mine and I decided to go on an impromptu camping trip to get away from our significant others. We packed up enough supplies to last us about a week and had every intention of staying out there that long. It was just her and I, and her 2-year-old son. We drove out past Greenwater, Washington, and ventured off onto Forest System Trail number 70 to find some free camping in the National Forest. We ended up finding a really awesome spot that was very much tucked away in the woods and was nestled along a creek. This area is pretty popular come summertime and on the weekends, but this was a Monday, so we weren't expecting to see anyone. We arrived fairly late, around 5:30 p.m., and had camp set up at 6:30 p.m. We made a fire and nestled in for the night. We put her son to sleep around 8:30 p.m., and her and I stayed up for a while to chit-chat. Now, before I continue, I would like to specify that we both are avid campers. We were not afraid of being alone in the woods, and we were both armed. Not to mention my friend has a pretty extensive military background, and will switch to that mode to protect her child without blinking an eye. Well, that night, as soon as the sun went down, I had a terrible feeling that we were being watched. We did perimeter checks and never saw anyone. Her and I slept in shifts that night. The three of us woke up around 5 a.m., started a fire, and enjoyed breakfast together. My friend had to leave camp to go to work for a few hours, so she was gone from 7 a.m. until around 1:30 p.m. During that time, I went for a hike with her son and my 45. Pretty much the entire time, I had that feeling of being watched. I kept hearing branches breaking somewhere close to me, but never saw someone else or any animals. We made it back to camp, and my friend had returned, and we enjoyed lunch together while waiting for my boyfriend and her husband to arrive. They were coming for dinner and to bring us a new chainsaw since the one we had brought was faulty. There were plenty of fallen trees around, and we were going to stock up on firewood. Around this time, my friend expressed to me that she was feeling uneasy about staying. Something didn't feel right to her. We agreed that we would probably end up leaving in the morning. So once the guys arrived, we were all hanging out about 50 feet from camp while cutting up this log, when all of a sudden, my girlfriend looks up, and about 50 yards away is someone standing in the woods, slightly behind a tree, watching us. She grabbed her shotgun and took off after him with her husband in tow. They came back about 15 minutes later. They were unsure if this person was a man or a woman, but the person was big and wearing what they think was a gray hoodie. At this point, we are ready to get the hell out of Dodge. We start to break down the camp, which was a breeze because we had 4 adults to help. I was loading the kitchen supplies into the back of the Jeep when I got that same creepy feeling again. I looked to my right, and at first, I didn't see anything. A few moments later, I decided to look again, and this time, I thought I saw someone laying on the ground next to a large tree stump, trying to stay out of sight. I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me, but I kept staring, trying to make sense of it, and then the figure jumped up off the ground and then hid behind a large tree stump. This one was also large and wearing all black head to toe, it seemed. Needless to say, we got the hell out of there after that. I'm pretty bummed, though. I was planning on hiding in the woods for a week, and these damn tweakers or whatever creeped me out so much I only got one night.
Coming up, we're headed deep into the heart of Appalachia, where a vacationing couple's quiet retreat turns horrifying.
I never believed that some of the more scary urban myths and legends of Appalachia are real, but I have never experienced the level of fear that I had tonight. My wife and I were staying in a secluded cabin in Sautee-Nakuchi, just outside of Helen, Georgia. We woke up Monday morning to the sound of someone beating on the door and yelling. I got up quickly and in a panic and went to see what was going on, but I could see the person walking away as I made my way downstairs. And when I opened the door, no one was there. There had not been a car, and the road to the cabin was long enough that I think I would have seen the person still walking away, but there was just no one there. My cabin rental said they had no one out there besides us, and said to just call back if something happened like that again. We go about our day, still a little shaken, but we ended up having a great day. We went on a hike, got some good food, and did some tourist shopping. It was exactly what we needed to relax. Fast forward to this evening, we were trying to put sheets over the windows that had no curtains, and we heard some footsteps approaching behind our cabin porch, and we both immediately stopped and looked over, and the sound stopped. Of course, this could have just been an animal, but it still freaked me out. Then, about 30 seconds later, I saw what looked like headlights passing by the trees behind the porch, but again, we were the only ones out there, and there was no vehicle besides my own, and the headlights were facing away from the cabin. We start watching some TV, paused our show to get a snack, and we hear coming from outside what almost sounded like musical notes. It sounded both close and far away at the same time. This went on for about 2 to 3 minutes. I was trying to play it off as maybe some kind of animal call, but I knew that's not what it was. We start the show again and finished an episode about 30 minutes later. By this time, I had such an uneasy feeling, and my wife suggested we just go to sleep to get rest and maybe leave in the morning. I knew I wouldn't be able to sleep, and we both had a feeling that we were being watched and did not feel safe there at all. I called my mom, hoping to get some advice, as I told her that I felt unsafe there. She immediately said, "You should leave as soon as you can," which was weird because she hates when I have to drive anywhere at night. Almost 2 hours later, 2:30 a.m. We finally make it back home, and I feel much better, but I'm still very shaken up. I feel like some of the myths are wild, but I can't help but wonder what the heck could have been out there, because that musical note sound we heard did not sound like it came from an animal, human, or a radio just playing randomly. Could it have been someone trying to scare us? Or worse, someone trying to do us harm? Or could it have been a near encounter with some sort of Appalachian legend? I don't know, but I'm curious what others have to say. What do you think this was? I realize I may have overreacted, but I just had a gut feeling that we would have been in harm's way if we stayed.
Up next, a seasoned outdoorsman with a lifetime of experience in the wilds of West Virginia recounts a chilling encounter in the Devil's Ditch area with a humanoid creature.
One of the scariest incidents I've ever experienced occurred in an area known as the Devil's Ditch, where older folks advise having a gun at night or avoiding it altogether due to its remote, uninhabited nature and designation as a hunting reserve. One day around noon, I was with my father in the area, showing him side trails and fire roads. We stopped at the last gate, the farthest point accessible by vehicle. Planning to take a break, I stood on a rock peering into the woods to relieve myself. The dense undergrowth with larger poplars made it challenging to see more than 5 to 10 feet at eye level. Suddenly, the poplar trees, 10 to 15 feet in front of me, started shaking violently, and we heard strange noises resembling monkeys or samurai talk. The tulip poplars, 1 to 2 feet in diameter, 20 feet up, were moving freely as if something powerful was shaking them. Finishing quickly, I walked backward while my dad, pistol in hand, was yelling something. I can't remember what exactly anymore, but he sounded terrified. Jumping into the Jeep, I reversed down the rough fire road, hearing the entity's yells and footsteps for about half a mile. Chills run down my spine as I recount the experience, realizing it kept pace with the Jeep down the mountain through the woods, with glimpses of underbrush parting and a possible sighting of brown fur. In this area where I fish, target shoot, and hunt with friends, we've heard monkey-like sounds nearing dark, witnessed rocks falling inexplicably, and even had a friend's truck rocked in the middle of the night. While bears are common, their interactions with vehicles usually involve food. Though not a Bigfoot believer, I remain open-minded, acknowledging the possibility of unknown creatures. Recalling the incident, I remember a unique smell akin to bear, but with a human-like BO when we arrived, accompanied by an eerie quietness that heightened the feeling of being watched, unusual even for such environments. It's worth noting this occurred in June or July, when the underbrush resembled a dense jungle. I haven't gone back since, but plan to go back this upcoming hunting season. I will write back if anything more occurs.
Next, we're headed to 1988, where two old friends have a chance encounter with a winged dark figure with red eyes.
In early autumn 1988, I was at a local exhibition near Baltimore and bumped into Andy, an old friend who was there as part of a group from the Boy Scouts of York Adams Area Council, Pennsylvania. Both of us had been Boy Scouts together, and I was happy to see that he continued as a troop leader. We decided to grab a bite to eat and catch up a bit. It had been 12 years since we had seen each other. After a while, the subject of my paranormal investigations came into the conversation. He had always been fascinated with ghost sightings at Gettysburg and the surrounding area and had camped near the battlefield on several occasions. Andy stated that a few of the local troops had recently been camping at the old Camp Conewago, and some of the boys had reported hearing crying sounds and were spooked bad enough that a few left their campsites early. They had set up their campsites deeper than usual in the woods near the Conewago Creek Fork, where the Little Conewago and Main Conewago Creek meet. He stated that he and another scout leader were going to check out the area the following weekend, and he wanted to know if I'd at least go up for the day and investigate with them. I accepted the invitation. Camp Conewago is located north of New Oxford, Pennsylvania, in Adams County along the main Conewago Creek upstream from Dick's Dam. It was established in 1919 for exclusive use by the local Boy Scouts of America. The area is rich in early colonial history since it was located on a major hunting route used by the Susquehannock Indians. Several attempts to establish settlements in this area failed because of Indian raids. As well, the Susquehannocks constantly warred with neighboring tribes. The Susquehannocks were eventually forced back into northeast Maryland and Delaware, and the colonists were able to expand westward into the Allegheny Mountains. The area became an important trading stop for settlers to stock up on supplies and to get updates before heading into the wilderness. I met with Andy and John the following Friday at the campground. I was shocked at how little the place had changed. A flood of boyhood memories came over me while I walked around the cabins and the administration building. Andy wanted to know how long I planned to stay and that they were going to set up camp in the same area as the reports. I was game, so I told him I'd stay for the weekend, grabbed my gear, and followed them into the woods. I suppose we hiked about 500 yards or so before we came to the bank of the creek, and then we followed the creek for another 300 yards until we came to the fork. We set up 3 tents and had a nice fire going in short order. It was around 7 p.m. by this time, so we decided to stay close to camp for the remainder of the evening. The first night was fairly uneventful, though it felt that something was watching us the whole time. This could have been my imagination, but didn't say anything and kept my eyes open and head clear. These woods are somewhat thick with ground cover and are inhabited by a fair amount of wildlife, especially white-tailed deer and raccoons. I remember when I was a Boy Scout, the older kids would send out the new members of the scout troop on an initiation snipe hunt. They'd give the prospective hunter a burlap bag and a flashlight and set them out into the woods at night, telling them they could return only after they caught a snipe. They were usually running back to the campsite within an hour, scared to the point of tears. It was a bit cruel, but we all had to go through the indignity. It was a tradition. The next morning was sunny and cool, a perfect day to explore the woods. We sat down to breakfast when John asked if we heard footsteps and movement during the night. Andy said he slept straight through the night. I said I heard some movement, but assumed it was one of my companions. Nothing seemed to be disturbed in the campsite, so we dismissed it, though I still had this lingering sense that we were being watched. We spent the day walking for several miles through the woods and examining points of interest. I wasn't picking up any spirit connections and started to think that this was going to be a quiet weekend. About 6 p.m., we got back to camp and sat down to talk about any little thing that came into our heads. Later that evening, we were sitting around the fire engaged in a conversation about football when suddenly a scream rang out downstream from our location. I thought it sounded like an owl at first, but a few minutes later it happened again, and it distinctively sounded like a child. I couldn't tell how far away it was, but it lasted for several seconds and seemed to fade in and out. We got up and walked a few yards into the woods, expecting to hear the sound again. It was quiet for about an hour, and we were discussing what could have naturally caused that sound. I have heard bobcats, owls, and rabbits scream, and none sounded close to this. We agreed that it was definitely the cries of a child. We decided to stay up for the entire night. There was a full moon, and much of the woods and creek were visible. At approximately 1 a.m., I was walking the perimeter of our camp when I suddenly felt like something was watching me again. I mean, it felt like eyes were boring through me. I stood still and tried to gauge what was going on. I told Andy and John what I felt, and we started to walk deeper into the woods towards the fork. We walked about 50 feet when, without warning, we recognized to our right a large, dark figure with bright red eyes standing in the creek. And suddenly, it shot straight up into the air with an audible whoosh. A few seconds later, we heard another scream that seemed to fade as if it was moving away from us. We hurried back to the campsite and compared thoughts about this phantom or whatever it was. Andy was shaken up and didn't talk for several minutes until I prodded him for his recollection. John was surprisingly calm and estimated that it was 6 feet or so, dark in color, and seemed to have something extending from its back. I also noticed the structures on the back and commented that it reminded me of wings, but I was unsure. We all agreed that it had bright red eyes. This creature or phantom jettisoned so fast that we didn't even have time to get a flashlight on it. Andy wanted to spend the night in the administration building and come back and collect our gear in the morning. He and John walked back, but I decided to stay in the campsite for the remainder of the night. I'm no hero or that brave even, but since it took off when we saw it, I didn't really feel in danger. Unfortunately, nothing more significant occurred other than that feeling of being watched remained. I was aware of the numerous sightings of a Mothman in West Virginia, and it seemed that this being was somewhat similar in description. I and other friends have gone back to investigate this area since our sighting and have come up with minimal evidence, though a report of a dark creature was made by a resident who lived near Dick's Dam a few years later. While I still don't know exactly what we saw that night, hopefully I or someone else will be able to offer a plausible answer in the future.
Next up, a family discovers that their new home has a very haunted past.
When I bought this property a couple of years ago, one of the main selling points was the woods. Between the house and the road are rows and rows of red pine, roughly 5 acres and standing maybe 35 to 40 feet tall. Walking through these woods gives off an eerie feeling, but enjoyable still. The ground covered by many thick needles that actually give you a spring to your step when trekking through. Behind the home is more of a wild side landscape, with many different trees, a creek, and a winding path that's just wide enough for a small utility vehicle. These woods the kids and I enjoyed most. We have done a few projects, such as build a small wooden bridge to get to the other side of the creek. We made a rope swing, and they all have their own battery-operated vehicles to drive the path if they wanted to. One thing we did do last year looking back is that we found a huge pile of rocks in the middle of nowhere. The rocks varied in size from a handful to a little over a bowling ball size. While we were pulling rocks off that pile as if there was buried treasure inside, we never found anything more than other rocks. Nothing too exciting. The pile of rocks is maybe 10 feet long, 8 foot wide, and maybe 3 feet tall. We dug down deep enough to see rocks that were actually buried in the ground too, so we stopped. I am thinking now that maybe that wasn't such a good idea. In recent past, our family had dealt with something I thought would never happen, and that was a ghost or ghosts in our home. My wife and I talked about this with friends and family. I live in a small city, and talking with them, stories of this property began slowly coming out of the woodwork. The following stories below are accounts from what we heard happening in these woods. My wife spoke to her sister and her sister's husband. Her husband recalls 3 stories of the previous owner's experience. 2 of them he claims he can't remember, but I am taking it as either making it up to scare us or just refuses to tell us. The one experience he did say was that the man that lived there chose to never take trees from these woods, which is inconvenient being that the main source of heating for the house is a wood stove. The last thing was he never hunted in these woods. A couple days later, I spoke to a friend of mine, who we will call Bert, about the haunted house. Bert has been hunting in the woods behind this property for many years and decided to tell me of his experiences of what has happened to him and many hunters, including his young nephew now. Going out in the early hours before sunrise, everyone seems to see a silhouette of a man walking around, and when approached, he disappears. Another account is there is a light they see about the size of a credit card flying around, and that too, when approached, disappears. The one event that kind of sent chills up his spine was one morning he was up in a tree stand, all set up as hunters do, waiting and watching for a deer to pass by. He saw a light down below at the bottom of the tree just sitting there, so he called out and asked who it was. No answer. He became angry that this person was messing with his hunting site, so he began to threaten him or her. The light stayed right there at the bottom, so Bert climbed down, and as he climbed down, saw the light move away. He said he chased this light a good 40 yards or so, and then it just disappeared. He says he remembers standing there in a thick fog, and all of a sudden, debris from up above in the trees, such as leaves and twigs, came falling down upon him. And as he looked up, this huge gust of wind, strong enough to almost knock him down, came rushing in. He says he doesn't hunt alone anymore. Another friend who is a volunteer for the fire department told me they were called out there for a fire about 5 to 6 years ago. Apparently half of the house caught fire, but luckily no one was hurt or in the home at the time of the fire. He said it was strange because they could not find the source of the fire. He said that while they were there, he saw someone, a shadow really, standing just inside the yard by the woods for a glimpse, and when he turned to go catch up with him, there was no one there. He said he had an eerie feeling about the woods. He told his supervisor about what he saw, but he doesn't know if someone followed up by going to see if there was anyone or not. Now that I've told you what I've heard of the woods of my property, I have to say that I have not had any experiences myself in these woods, nor my kids. But recently, an event happened with someone I know from work. I've had some raccoon problems in the last few weeks as well. We have, or had, should I say, 6 chickens. In 2 evenings, we had lost 2 to the raccoons. We know they are raccoons because we saw them from the 2nd floor looking out the window in the evening. A co-worker of mine, who we will call Billy, overheard me telling another about losing my chickens, and he had offered his services to come out and exterminate them. Awesome. Problem solved. We agreed for him to come out on a Saturday evening, and he and his friend would come out and camp out for a couple of hours around the chicken coop late at night to pick them off as they came. Around 8:30 in the evening, they pulled in the driveway, got their gear, and decided a change of plans. Because the layout of the property and woods, they first were going to check the abandoned camper, then patrol the pines, and then patrol the woods in the back. Within 10 minutes, I received a text from him saying they got a huge one in the camper and were now going to patrol the pines. I replied with a "Great job, guys," but told them to be careful in the pines. There are a couple of deep bunkers within the pines and to not trip and fall into them. About 15 minutes later, I walked out on the deck from the second floor and saw them coming back. I asked how it went. They told me they thought it would be better to come back to the house. What had happened was they walked deep within the pines, looking up to pick them out of the trees, and they heard branches and needle crunching from what they thought was a coyote. They looked down in the snow and had seen some tracks. The noises grew, and it seemed like there were more than one now. They felt they were being circled, worried that they stumbled upon a den and hightailed it back to the house. They said they were going to walk the backwoods now. I thought maybe this wasn't a good idea, so I tried to talk them out of it. I told them I had heard stories of those woods in the dark. Their reply was they have dealt with scary things in the woods before, and that they would be fine. "Okay then, good luck, and I will see you on the other side," I told them. I went back inside. About 10 minutes later, I received a text. It said, "We are leaving now." I walked outside to catch up with them before they left for the night. Before they walked down the woods, I saw 2 young men with their firearms, confident and all Rambo'd up for the extermination. When I saw them on their return, they were 3 shades whiter, eyes wide open, and they were talking so fast I had to ask them to slow down. One of them just put his guns away and got right into the truck. Billy explained to me what had happened. They walked down the path, and while walking, they felt they were being watched. They heard a big crack of a branch on the ground behind them. They quickly turned around and flashed their spotlight and saw nothing. No noise of animals running away, no broken branches, no nothing. They continued down the path, and about midway, Billy saw what had looked like a glowing white blob, he says, roughly about 5 feet tall and hovering. They flashed the light on it, and it moved so fast it was a blur and disappeared. Talking to each other, asking if they saw it, and just then branches and twigs crunching behind them. The others saw it again, and as they flashed the light, again it disappeared. This happened 2 more times, each time appearing to get closer and closer. It was messing with them, always disappearing in a blur and then appearing behind them. This is when I received the text and they ran back to the house. Billy told this story to many coworkers at my place of employment, and of course he got a hard time for it. No one believes his story nor mine of the house, and that's okay. There are now 3 guys at work who are planning on walking the woods to debunk his story. I'm unsure if this is a good idea or not, but I'm leaning towards letting them. I kind of want to see if they have similar experiences.
Next, in 1993, living in Camden, Maine, an avid hiker experiences an otherworldly encounter during a late winter hike.
In 1993, I was living in Camden, Maine. I moved there 3 months before from Pennsylvania, and it was wonderful. Miles of coastline and forest. Mount Batty was a park in Camden. You can drive the mountain or hike it, it's all beautiful. Look east at the bay, nothing but ships in sight. Look north and you could watch the skiers on the slope a half mile away. Down the road, I was told about trails that you can hike for miles and miles. One winter, being a hiker, I loaded up my dog, got a map, and went for a late winter hike. Snow was in the forecast, but I couldn't wait any longer, so we took off, snow or not. After about 2 hours of following the trail through the mountains, it started snowing real hard, almost whiteout conditions. We didn't care. My dog loved it, and so did I. There was a feeling of magic in the air, and snow was everywhere. I came across an open field, maybe about 300 feet of open space. My dog became scared and ran in circles barking. I thought maybe a bear was near. I looked around and could see all around me. No trees, just open field. My dog started going crazy, and now I'm worried.
Ginger, come
I started
here.
calling for my dog, but she was nowhere in sight. I could hear her barking, but she was running away in the opposite direction. I was looking around for a minute or 2 in the open field, but found nothing. She was nowhere to be seen, but nowhere to hide in this field. I turned to my left, and suddenly there was a man standing 3 feet away from me. So close, I almost fell over.
It was a shock. Where did this guy come from, I thought. I backed off about 5 feet and looked at him. At the time, I was too shocked to think clearly. So I just said, "Where did you come from?" He was way over 6 feet, closer to 7 feet, and pure white like a fake plastic doll. He didn't answer me, so I turned around because I started to hear my dog again, but really far away. I was looking around for 3 or 4 seconds and I turned back. The man was gone. It was snowing like hell all of a sudden, and I started looking all around me. No one. Nothing but empty field all around me. One thing I did notice was all the footprints around me were mine, no second set of prints. I started to head out of there. About 20 feet down the trail, I saw a single footprint alongside my half-snow-covered print. As I walked, there was another about 10 feet away, new and fresh. Every 10 feet another, as if this was a stride of something incredibly tall. All going the opposite direction. I tried running and jumping to match the stride of the prints. No way could I do it. Not even close, and I'm a tall and limber 6 feet tall. It was going the way I came in, so I followed it, still hearing my dog. All of a sudden, with fresh snow, my old prints were pretty much covered and disappeared. When I got back to my truck, my dog was underneath it and not willing to get out. I'm part American Indian, and I've heard stories about wood sprites. They can take the shape of people, but look fake if you look close. I think that is what I ran into that day. A week or so later, I went back the same way as before. I never found that open field again, only mountain trails. Where could that open space have gone? Was I just misremembering where it was?
Coming up, in the remote outskirts of southwestern Bangladesh, a man recounts a childhood encounter with a terrifying creature lurking just outside his house.
When this story took place, I was 7 years old and in 2nd grade. I lived with my father, mother, and my sister. My father is a teacher at a cadet college, a series of well-known semi-military residential schools in Bangladesh. Back when I lived there, the cadet college was half engulfed into the Sundarbans, one of the largest mangrove forests in the world. It is basically a salty swamp. Stories about these supernatural phenomenons inside are widely known in our country. The house we were given by the cadet college has a history. During the Liberation War of Bangladesh in 1971, the cadet college was an active battlefield and Pakistani soldiers' encampment. They had used some of the residential quarters available at that time to dump the bodies of the people they had massacred. Our house was one of those. They had found 17 bodies in this house. Suspicious things would often happen. Every few weeks, there would be 1 or more nights when there would be banging and scraping on the doors every few minutes. Deep into the night, there would even be groaning and moaning sounds. My parents always discarded them as the wind. I did too. But my sister would always get startled when it happened. We shared a room until she was admitted into another cadet college when she was 12, so she went away, leaving me to sleep alone in the room. I was 6 then. One night when I was 7, my parents were out for an office party. I was doing my homework. It was summer, and due to voltage shortage, the fans in the house were spinning really slowly, so it was hot inside the house. After finishing my homework, I came outside on the porch, turning the light of the porch on. Again, due to voltage shortage, the light was barely illuminating the porch. I walked around on the porch for a few moments and remembered that I had left the fan of my room running. As I entered the house, leaving the front door open, I heard something that sounded like distant thunder. I paid little mind, as thunderstorms are quite common in the summer in Bangladesh. Thinking back on it, I should have. All the windows in the house were open. It took me about 10 seconds to go to my room, turn off the fan, and come back. It was when I came back to the threshold of the front door and let my eyes adjust to the meager light outside and the darkness beyond, did I see the creature just at the edge of the porch. It stood bipedal like a human. If you told me to guess, I'd say it was 7 to 8 feet in height. Its body was covered in what looked like black fur. Its head was that of a dog. I cannot tell you which breed, but one with a long face and pointy ears, and it had yellow eyes. We stared at each other for a while. It bared its pointy teeth a little and made that sound that I thought was distant thunder. I unfroze and immediately closed and bolted the door, went to the kitchen and turned up all the stoves. Then I ran and hid in the cupboard. My parents had to bang on the door for 15 long minutes when they came back. They were not happy, but I was safe from that thing. I don't know what it was, but I never saw it again.
For our final story of the evening, a mother has a terrifying experience with her child's imaginary friend.
My story began late August or early September 2016. The school my son goes to called us and said he was crying. When they asked why, he told them that the mystery person told him to hurt his brother. He said he wasn't going to listen to him, though. At the time, I didn't think much of it because school can be stressful for a 5-year-old that has just started kindergarten. I shrugged it off as his imagination. He does play pretend with normal things like Ninja Turtles and stuff, so at the time this didn't seem too crazy. A few weeks later, I picked him up from school and we went to Walgreens. On our way, he mentioned that the mystery person was following us. We got into the store and he said, "Look, Mommy, he is crawling on the walls. Now he's crawling on the ceiling." I looked at him while he was saying this, and his eyes were definitely tracking something that I could not see. I asked him what his name was, and he told me, he can't tell me his name. I asked, well, why not? And he said, because he has no face, he has no mouth, no eyes, no nose or ears. I thought this was getting a bit strange, but being a very rational person, I still assumed his imagination was just running wild. He would still talk about having seen it at school over the next month. I didn't get many details about it until probably early November when we were downstairs playing. He said he had seen the mystery person at school. I asked him, where does the mystery person come from? He told me, he comes from underground and is covered in fire. At this point, I began to suspect maybe there's a bit more to this thing than just imagination. There is nothing he watches or has ever seen that remotely resembles anything like he has described. He watches SpongeBob and Dora, and that's about it. My older son, who is 7, said, the mystery person is not real. This made my 5-year-old upset. He reaffirmed to him that he was indeed real. Most of the time, nothing happens regarding this around our house. I would say 99% of the time, he is a completely normal 5-year-old. He has friends, is not super quiet, but not very talkative either. A few weeks later, probably late November, is when it started to get very strange. I was cooking dinner and I hear him from his room yell, "Mommy, come look, come look." I put dinner on hold for a moment and went to his room. He was jumping on his bed laughing and looking out the window. He points to our neighbor's nativity scene they had set up earlier that day across the street and says, "Look, Mommy, the mystery person, he doesn't like baby Jesus." Now at this point, I am pretty sure there is a lot more to this thing than imagination at work. This kid has been to a church maybe 5 times in his life, although he did go to preschool at a church, which is where he learned about baby Jesus. He said baby Jesus was making the mystery person angry, so he left. About 3 weeks later, it actually got even worse. He was outside playing during recess and just started crying. The teacher asked him what was wrong, and he said, "The mystery person told me to get the sharpest piece of metal and kill my friends." At this point, the school needed to have a meeting with us to address the issue. The next day, my husband went to meet with them, and he finds out that the counselor had asked him what it looks like. He told her his skin was black, and he wears a hood. He was very precise about it, going as far to mention that it is not like a black person, but black. He had also mentioned that it lives underground underneath his classroom, and that it was going to leave on the first day of winter and return in the spring. I thought to myself, finally, he mentioned something that does not align with a demon. A few days later, I decided to do some research on demons, and come to find out that this is actually a fairly common thing. I read about a demon, and there was a line, "This demon, like many others, will leave on the first day of winter and return in the spring." We still have no idea how he knew when the first day of winter was. He wasn't learning that in kindergarten, and we didn't tell him, but on December 21st, he knew. The next day, I thought, screw this thing, so I went to the Christian bookstore and got him his own little nativity scene and a cross necklace for good measure. I set out the nativity scene in our living room and told him I got him a cool necklace if he wants to wear it. He didn't want to wear it at the time, so I hung it up on the fridge. December 23rd comes, and he is looking out the window in our kitchen and says, "The mystery person is gone now, but he will be back." He pauses and points to the cross necklace I had hung on the fridge and says, "Mommy, the mystery person doesn't like that." I asked if he wanted to wear it, and he said yes, very enthusiastically. He put on the necklace and was dancing to a Disney song in the living room, saying, "Oh, the mystery person is so mad about this, he is very angry." He stops and points right at me and says, "Mommy, the mystery person says I know what you are trying to do." I said, "I thought the mystery person was gone now." And my son said to me, "He is, but I can still hear him." This is the point at which I think to myself, screw this thing, I am getting a priest in here. I found a priest that would come do a house blessing. He asked me all sorts of questions about what books I read to him, shows he watches, games he plays, all that sort of thing. As far as I knew, there were no cursed objects in the house or anything like that, and I wasn't showing him any horror movies or crazy stuff, so he comes over about a week later. As soon as the priest steps foot in our house, my son had a message for him. He said, "The mystery person wants to hurt you." The priest did the blessing. Everything was normal and went well, I thought. Since then, he hasn't been able to hear this thing inside our house. I'm somewhat worried because he is back in school now and tells his teacher the mystery person is underneath the classroom sleeping. There are a few other details we have received about it. It has glowing red eyes at night, has a shield of fire. He said something one time about its body having ornaments around it and that it tries to be sneaky. He sees a psychiatrist that has ruled out the possibility of him being crazy. The school counselor says something like this is way outside the pretend range for a 5-year-old, and she also has seen him track it with his eyes. I have no idea what to do. He has asked us to make him go away. He learned that if he shows it Jesus, it gets mad and runs away. We never told him to do that, and I'm not sure how he learned that. I am 99% sure this thing is real. I just have no idea how to explain to a 5-year-old what it is he is seeing. On Christmas Eve, he was in the car and started laughing. He told us God gave him a present that means God will protect him and that he belongs to God now. I asked to see it, and at the time I had no idea what it was. It looked like a tiny medal with a cross on it. After doing a search, we found out it is a St. Benedict medal. St. Benedict, I guess, is the protector of schoolchildren and protection from demons. We started taking him to church, and he sees it outside of churches. I asked him what it is doing, and he said he waits to attack someone when they leave here. Lately, it's been quiet, and thankfully there has been nothing new.
Wow. Now again, I'm not a religious person at all, but I think with the paranormal, everything has to be on the table as far as explanations go. There are a number of cases where a haunting has only ended when the person being affected calls out in Jesus' name. I mean, who really knows why that works? But it works more often than not, from what I understand. It doesn't really change my belief system, but it does offer up some pretty interesting questions. That's all for tonight, dear listeners. Until next time, I'll be leaving you in the dark where whispers linger and shadows dance. Stay wary, sleep well, and beware the whispers in the night. If you have a story to tell, please reach out via email at contact@campfirecultpod.com or leave me a voicemail message at 720-297-8608. You can follow us anywhere on social media at campfirecultpod and online at campfirecultpod.com. And finally, if you don't mind, please rate and review wherever possible.